Hey everyone and welcome to Storytime. My name is Jake and today we are going to be looking at the subreddit r/maliciouscompliance, where people conform to the letter but not the spirit of a request. If you're new around here, please do hit subscribe down below so that you never miss out on another video. But for now, let's sit back, relax, and enjoy some malicious compliance. Okay chef, let's do it your way. While I was studying, I started working for a successful bar, which also served gourmet wood-fire pizza. I was employed as a kitchen hand, and my main duties were helping on the pizza section during service, helping with food prep, dishwashing, and cleaning. After 6 months, I had slowly taken more and more initiative in the kitchen, until I was eventually promoted to cook, which meant I learned how to cook all the dishes in the kitchen, even the fancy stuff, and usually ran the kitchen on late night service with the help of a more junior kitchen hand. Around 1 year in, my boss, the head chef, decided we needed a better pizza dough recipe. He bought a dough recipe from a popular pizza place in my city, and it tasted great. But the problem was that it didn't last long in the fridge, which meant lots of wastage. So, head chef decided to tweak the recipe to make it last longer. He changed the type of yeast and changed it to a cool proof instead of a warm proof, along with many other things. Now, to give some context, by this point I had become one of the better pizza guys on the team, and quite a few of my colleagues had commented that the dough I made always came out the best, which I attribute to quite a few modifications I had made to the recipe over 12 months of working at it. I had changed almost every part of the recipe except for the actual basic ingredients used. I made the recipe a bit more adaptable too. If we suddenly needed an extra batch ready to use in 4 hours, I would make it completely differently than a batch that would sit in the cool room all week. I'm definitely no master baker, and I don't pretend to understand the micro-scale workings of the whole process, but trial and error and lots of repetition taught me a thing or two at least. Head chef never said a word about me quietly tweaking the recipe, because the feedback from the customers was almost always good, and he was getting all the credit. Head chef initially came across as a nice guy, pretty chilled out, but he was a terrible boss and very disorganized. This led to us never having the necessary stock to prep all the menu items, and always having poor staffing ratios and skill mix. These faults alone would be forgivable. After all, he was a nice guy under a lot of stress, but he was constantly jerking staff members around. He promised full-time contracts that were never signed, pay rises that never hit the bank, staff parties that never happened, and constantly rostering us to work on days that we had specifically asked to have off. One chef was employed on a sponsored visa, meaning that if he lost his job, he would likely have to leave the country, and this poor chef got worked into the ground, basically abused, because the boss knew he couldn't do anything about it. Safe to say, morale got pretty low in the kitchen, and lots of the staff were looking for jobs elsewhere. It gets to Christmas, and it's end of year party time for a lot of businesses, which means our venue was booked out every day and night for a month. We had all been working crazy hours doing prep work, and while I was at home, finally chilling out after a double shift, my phone starts blowing up. Head chef is blasting us all on our work group chat because one of the batches of dough had turned out crappy. Not my batch, of course. And he was demanding that we all had to follow the recipe to the letter. I spoke to the head chef the next day to remind him that we didn't have the right kind of yeast for that recipe, and to ask if we were having some delivered. Head chef told me I was to use the yeast we had, that it would be fine. I tried to point out that the original recipe was written for a different type of yeast and proofing method, but he shut me down pretty hard. I'm the head chef here, and you're a dishwasher. I said it'll be fine. Okay, chef, let's do it your way. The next day, I prepped 20 batches of dough, which for our small kitchen was a massive amount. On a typical weekend, I would have gone through 1, maybe 2 batches, but for the next week, all the customers had paid in advance and they wanted huge amounts of food for their end of year parties. And why not, when it's company coin? As explicitly instructed, I made all 20 batches exactly as stated in the original recipe, just like I'd been told. I used precisely 0 of my hard-learned tips and tricks. The first big night comes around, and I already know it's going to be a disaster. The dough is terrible, like really, really bad. I seriously felt ashamed sending them out, but there was nothing to be done at that point. Then the feedback started coming in. It was not great, let me assure you. The next day, after presumably getting chewed out by one of the event organizers from the night before, head chef comes into the kitchen and tells us to throw away the entire week's worth of dough, and that we would all be offered overtime for as many additional hours we had to stay back to remake it all. We were almost exclusively on fixed rates until that point. On top of that, in a sublime piece of sweet satisfaction, I overhear the head chef quietly tells the sous chef to get them to make it the other way, before walking out of the kitchen. Sous chef is the aforementioned visa holder. He turns to me with a knowing grin and nothing more is said. I continued working in the kitchen until I completed my studies, mainly because the late night shifts rarely interfered with my curriculum, but almost all of the other staff moved on from that place. I'll never know just how much it cost the bar to replace all that dough, or how much revenue they lost reimbursing the customer, or how head chef explained it all to his corporate bosses, probably blamed us. But I like to think he got exactly what he asked for. Edit. Sous chef now runs the kitchen and head chef has moved to another venue. Before this story, I just thought there was like one way to make pizza dough. I didn't think there was so much variation in how they made it, but yeah, I guess it is. You want me to go to my father's? Okay. This was a few years ago, but at the time, I was underage and living with my abusive mother. She had gone to great lengths to keep me living with her, which I had no idea as to why, as we did nothing but fight. There were other things, but I'll leave them out as I don't want to relive them as I write this. One day, she tells me she's leaving for a week down south for work or something. At first, when she said she wanted me to spend the week at my father's, I protested. I was 16 at the time and could easily take care of myself. However, she truly believed I could not handle being alone for a week. At the time, I wasn't very close with my father, something she worked hard to make sure of, and just wanted to be at home alone for a week. Eventually, I saw that I would not have a say in the matter. Then, the idea dawned on me. I could sort of move out. I packed up everything I really cared about, which was really only enough to fill a suitcase and a backpack, and then was picked up by my father, as my mother refused to do anything when it involved him. After the week ended, I simply blocked my mother's phone number and continued to live with my dad, who was actually quite pleasant living with. This was about 4 years ago and is probably the best decision I've ever made in my life. I don't understand that, why like parents that are abusive or whatever, they try to go to like big lengths to make sure that the other partner doesn't get to see them. It's like, if you don't care, then why do you care so much? Told my grandpa I was allergic to the beans he made for dinner. He doesn't believe me and insists I eat everything I've been served. Okay, you're the boss. So, to preface, I'm allergic, or at the very least wildly intolerant, to beans. When I was a tot, my mum tried to feed me beans a few times, and within 5 minutes, I would projectile vomit right across the kitchen floor. She put 2 and 2 together, and after that, no more beans for Lani Barney. So jump forward a few years. I was around 6 to 8 years old, visiting my grandparents for a winter break. I loved hanging out with my grandfather. He'd always bring me neat things like books and logic puzzles for us to play through together. That day in particular, he had bought me new crushed velvet pajamas covered in stars and comets. I was super excited to wear them to bed and was already wearing them at the table when everything went down. Dinner time rolls around and my grandfather reveals that he made slow roasted beans for us. I immediately tell him and my grandmother that I don't eat beans because they make me sick. My grandfather rolled his eyes and told me to sit and eat my dinner. Now, to be fair, I was a little bit of a picky eater, but I never would claim that the food I disliked would make me sick. I'd just say I didn't like this food. Beans were the only thing I'd explicitly say made me sick. I repeat again that I don't eat beans, that my mum never makes me eat them, and that they make me sick. Grandfather starts getting mad and tells me that either I sit at the table until I finish all the beans I had been served, or I can go straight to bed and expect to be put on restriction for the next few days. My grandmother tells him that he should just leave me be, but he isn't having it. This was the only time I ever felt anything other than pure wholesome love for my grandpa. He and my grandmother finished their dinner and started to clean up while I thought about what I should do. On one hand, I could just go to bed and accept that I'd probably have no cartoon time for the next few days. But I was so mad that he didn't believe me that I refused to accept being punished for telling the truth. So I sat there and ate the entire bowl of beans. I'm 24 now, and that singular bowl of beans probably represents at least 80% of the beans I have ever consumed in my life. I hated the texture, the smell, absolutely everything about what I was eating, but he said to eat them all, so that's exactly what I was going to do. About halfway through, I start feeling strange, but push through it, swallowing the beans whole and washing it down with as much milk and cornbread as possible. All in all, it probably took me 15 or so minutes to finish, but it felt like hours. I finish up, put my bowl in the sink, and softly announce that I'm done with all my food. I remember he patted me on the back and said, "See? It wasn't that bad, was it?" As we walked down the hall towards the bedrooms. At the very end of the hall was the doorway to his and my grandmother's bedroom, with a bathroom directly across the hall. He told me to brush my teeth while he changed into his pajamas, and that he would come to my room afterwards to tuck me in. I open my mouth to say okay, and all of a sudden, all my Lani Barney alarms go off. I about to face so that I'm facing the bathroom, try to take the few stops to at least make it to the sink, fail, and proceed to projectile vomit all over the floor, the vanity, the mirror, and myself. Chunks of beans and cornbread collected at my feet as I coughed up everything I had swallowed whole. The milk mixed with the beans in the most horrific way possible, making the vomit thicker and stickier. My new pajamas were absolutely ruined, and the smell only made me vomit even more. I started to cry as I stood in a pool of the vilest mixture of fluids I had ever seen come out of my body. It was so sudden and violent that my grandparents couldn't even react right away. My grandmother, who had been lying in bed but could still see everything go down, scooped me up and started consoling me. I peeped at my grandfather, who was still standing there, horrified at what he had just seen, and stammered, "I told you beans made me sick," in the most defeated voice I could muster. My grandmother gave him a death glare and told him curtly that since he had pushed me to eat the beans, he could clean up the beans. She helped me shower in their bathroom and calm down, until I asked about my pajamas. The stomach bile basically ruined them, and she told me that we should just throw them away. I cried even harder. When she finally got me to lay down and go to sleep an hour later, my grandfather was still purging in the bathroom. The next morning, he apologized to me profusely and promised he'd never do anything like that again. As far as I know, not only did he never again force me to eat anything I said I didn't want, he extended the same policy to the rest of his grandkids. Years later, he'd say he could still remember the stench of the bathroom that night and the disgusting sensation of scooping semi-solid beans from every imaginable surface. That was a pretty gross but wholesome story, I've got to admit. I like how the guy learned after the malicious compliance, but yeah, it was still pretty gross. Hey everyone, I hope you all had a really good day and that you enjoyed that video. If you want to check out some other videos, then click on screen right now, or check out the playlist down below. If you enjoyed that video, then please do leave a like, and if you want to submit your own stories, then you can do so by joining the Discord in the top link in the description. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon.